Have you ever quietly felt that you are late in life? Not tired, not incapable, just late. You look at others moving forward, and a subtle pressure appears inside you. You begin to believe your chance has already passed, that the right time was years ago, and now you are only trying to repair what cannot be repaired. So you stop attempting real change and start only managing your days. But what if this feeling is not truth, only a conclusion your mind repeated too long? What if the real problem is not your age, your past, or your mistakes, but the belief that change must happen early to matter? Many people are not stuck because life closed the door. They are stuck because they quietly decided the door is closed. And once the mind accepts that idea, it stops rebuilding. This audiobook is not about becoming someone new overnight. It is about understanding a simple psychological truth. A person does not become late in life. A person only stops beginning again. Chapter 1. Why people believe they are too late. There is a quiet moment many adults experience that they rarely confess to anyone. It often appears late at night, after work is done and distractions fade. They begin reviewing their life as if reading a finished story instead of a living one. They remember plans they once carried seriously and notice how different the present looks from what they imagined years ago. Nothing dramatic happened. No disaster destroyed their future. Instead, life simply continued, and slowly their direction dissolved. From that moment, a thought forms, almost innocent at first. Maybe my important time already passed. They do not say it aloud, but they begin living as if it were true. They stop experimenting, stop risking embarrassment, and stop allowing themselves to start again. What they call realism is often only resignation. They believe they are late, not because of age, but because they quietly concluded their story, already reached its ending, while they were still living inside it. Much of this belief is built through comparison, not experience. A person can be moving steadily forward until they see someone younger achieving something visible. Suddenly their own progress appears invisible, even to themselves. Social milestones act like clocks in the mind. Marriage by this age, success by that age, stability by another. These timelines are rarely chosen consciously, yet they shape emotional reality powerfully. When someone notices they did not follow the same schedule, they interpret difference as failure. The mind does not say, "I took another path." It says, "I missed my chance." But life never agreed to those schedules. They were borrowed expectations collected from family, school, and culture. A person measures themselves against an imagined calendar and then punishes themselves for not obeying it. In truth, nothing in nature blooms simultaneously, yet people treat human growth as if it should. School years quietly create another illusion. For nearly 2 decades, progress follows a predictable structure: grade levels, examinations, promotion, and graduation. Advancement is clear and externally confirmed. A person learns to associate growth with structured timelines and official approval. When adulthood begins, this structure disappears, but the psychological expectation remains. Without visible markers, they feel lost. They assume that if success did not occur within the familiar educational timeline, it cannot occur later. The mind struggles without checkpoints, so it invents a conclusion: I am behind. Yet adulthood is not a curriculum. It has no fixed semester, no final exam, and no uniform pace. But the person unconsciously waits for a teacher who will never return to confirm they are progressing. In the absence of validation, they interpret uncertainty as lateness. Another force shaping this belief is memory. The mind remembers the past selectively, highlighting opportunities that were not taken and magnifying them beyond their real importance. A missed job application becomes the opportunity of my life. A relationship that ended becomes the one chance at happiness. Memory edits events into symbols, then presents them as irreversible turning points. Over time, the person stops seeing possibilities and begins seeing permanent losses. They imagine that life once offered a perfect doorway, and that doorway closed forever. Yet reality rarely contains single doors. It contains many entrances, often unrecognized because they do not resemble the imagined one. But memory prefers a dramatic narrative, so the person lives inside a story of regret instead of a landscape of options. Regret strengthens the illusion because it feels meaningful. When someone regrets deeply, they believe they are honoring the importance of the past. They think letting go would disrespect what could have been, so they keep revisiting the same mental scenes, polishing them until they shine brighter than the present. Eventually, the present seems dull compared to imagined alternative histories. The person does not move forward because emotionally they are still negotiating with yesterday. They are not late in life. They are still mentally standing in an old moment, hoping it will reopen. Regret becomes a form of attachment, disguised as reflection. While they analyze what should have happened, time continues, but they do not participate in it. Fear also contributes quietly. Starting again requires humility, and humility exposes vulnerability. A person worries about looking inexperienced among younger beginners. They fear questions like, "Why are you only doing this now?" Instead of risking embarrassment, they protect dignity by refusing to begin. The mind chooses safety over possibility and calls it practicality. It feels less painful to claim it is too late than to risk discovering they are capable but unprepared. Believing one is late becomes emotional armor. It prevents disappointment because it prevents effort. If they never try, failure cannot occur. The statement, "I missed my chance," often hides a deeper fear. I am afraid to start without certainty. Cultural stories reinforce this belief repeatedly. Society celebrates early success intensely, young entrepreneurs, prodigies, and overnight achievements. These stories are powerful but incomplete. They rarely show the quiet, slow builders who begin later and progress steadily. Visibility shapes perception. When people see only early triumphs, they assume timing determines worth. They forget that most real mastery develops privately over long periods. A person watching these stories feels not inspired but excluded. They assume they are outside the acceptable starting window. But life never required a specific starting age. The mind simply interprets celebrated exceptions as universal rules. Another reason people feel late is the misunderstanding of time itself. They imagine time as a narrow opportunity that closes permanently, rather than a continuous process they inhabit daily. They believe growth belongs to youth, because youth appears energetic and flexible, yet growth is not owned by a life stage. Growth belongs to attention and action. A person who changes thinking patterns today changes their direction regardless of age. But the mind confuses physical aging with psychological limitation. Because the body matures, they assume possibility shrinks. In reality, experience often provides clarity. Younger years lacked what they call lateness may actually be readiness finally forming. Identity plays a powerful role as well. Over years, people adopt labels: practical one, quiet one, unreliable one, average one. These identities become comfortable narratives. When an opportunity for change appears, it conflicts with the established self-image. Beginning again would require admitting they are not the person they long believed themselves to be. Rather than updating identity, they protect it by claiming timing prevents change. Saying too late allows them to keep a familiar self-definition. The barrier is not the calendar, but the story they tell about who they are allowed to become. Another hidden influence is fatigue from previous attempts. Many adults tried once, failed, and interpreted the result permanently. They assume effort has already been tested and judged. What they forget is that earlier attempts were made with different awareness, skills, and emotional maturity. A past failure becomes evidence against future effort, even though the person is no longer the same. They judge present potential using outdated experience. The mind prefers consistency, so it repeats the same conclusion. It did not work then, therefore it will not work now. But people evolve constantly. The conditions have changed even if the memory has not. Environment also shapes perception. If someone lives among people who stopped striving, their stillness feels normal. Conversations revolve around stability, security, and avoiding risk. Slowly ambition appears unrealistic. The person absorbs this emotional atmosphere and internalizes it. They begin believing maturity means settling rather than expanding. The idea of beginning again feels childish in that context. Yet environment influences belief more than reality does. A different circle might interpret the same decision as courage rather than lateness. Often people are not late in life. They are surrounded by narratives that discourage renewal. Finally, the mind dislikes uncertainty. A new beginning contains unknown outcomes. Declaring it too late provides psychological closure. It converts uncertainty into certainty, even if the certainty is limiting. The statement comforts because it ends the question. They no longer need to consider possibilities or make decisions. But this relief comes with a hidden cost. The future becomes a repetition of the present. What appears to be acceptance is often avoidance. The person did not discover they were late. They created a belief that protected them from the discomfort of starting without guarantees. Understanding this changes everything. People do not believe they are late because life demanded it. They believe it because the mind seeks safety. Memory exaggerates the past. Society glorifies early achievement, and identity resists change. The conclusion feels factual, but it is constructed. When a person recognizes this, something subtle shifts. The idea of lateness loses authority. They begin to see that time never actually told them to stop beginning. They told themselves, and what the mind concluded, the mind can also reconsider. Chapter 2. The mind protects comfort, not growth. A person often assumes the mind exists to improve their life, yet its first duty is simpler: preservation. The mind's primary concern is safety, and safety is defined by familiarity. Anything known feels manageable, even when it produces dissatisfaction. This is why people can remain in routines that drain them while still feeling strangely secure inside them. The discomfort of repetition is predictable, and predictability calms the mind more than possibility does. Growth, on the other hand, introduces uncertainty. New actions require new behaviors, and new behaviors require the risk of mistakes. To the mind, mistakes resemble danger, even when they are harmless. So it gently persuades the person to stay where they are. It does not shout, "Do not grow." Instead it whispers, "This is good enough." Comfort becomes convincing because it removes anxiety. But the same comfort slowly reduces vitality, and the person confuses stability with well-being. Consider someone who thinks about changing careers for years. They imagine learning something meaningful, perhaps studying again or building a new skill. Yet each morning they wake and repeat the same day. They are not incapable. They are waiting for confidence. But confidence never appears because the mind refuses to authorize action until certainty exists. The mind demands guarantees before movement, while growth only appears after movement. So the person remains still, believing hesitation is careful thinking. In reality, it is protection. The mind would rather maintain a known dissatisfaction than face an unknown improvement. By postponing effort, it avoids short-term discomfort. Unfortunately, it also postpones long-term fulfillment. The person then interprets their stagnation as laziness or lack of discipline, not realizing their mind has been quietly steering them away from uncertainty the entire time. Comfort disguises itself as logic. The mind produces reasonable explanations to defend inaction. It says, "Now is not the right time," or "You need more preparation," or "You might fail and waste effort." These arguments feel intelligent, yet they often appear precisely when a meaningful step is possible. If the opportunity disappears, the arguments fade as well. The reasoning was never about accuracy. It was about protection. The mind constructs narratives that make avoidance appear wise. A person believes they are thinking carefully when they are actually negotiating with fear. Because the explanation sounds rational, they trust it. Over months and years, these small postponements accumulate into a life that looks unchanged. They did not consciously refuse growth. They repeatedly accepted comfort disguised as caution. Even emotional patterns reveal this tendency. Someone may remain in relationships that no longer nurture them simply because the dynamics are familiar. The arguments, disappointments, and apologies follow predictable rhythms. The person knows what tomorrow will feel like. Leaving introduces emotional uncertainty, loneliness, adjustment, and self-redefinition. The mind calculates that familiar discomfort is safer than unfamiliar peace. So it encourages patience beyond wisdom. The person interprets endurance as loyalty, yet the deeper cause is fear of the unknown. Growth would require redefining identity and routine. Comfort requires only repetition. Thus they stay, not because staying helps them, but because leaving demands courage the mind tries to avoid. Habits demonstrate the same principle clearly. When someone attempts to wake earlier, exercise, or change daily behavior, the resistance appears strongest in the beginning. The mind experiences the new habit as disruption. It produces fatigue, boredom, and persuasive excuses. After several days, the person often returns to old patterns, concluding the change was unrealistic. But the difficulty was not a sign of impossibility. It was the mind protecting established rhythms. Once a behavior repeats long enough, the mind eventually accepts it as normal. The resistance disappears not because the action became easier physically, but because it became familiar psychologically. What once felt uncomfortable becomes automatic. The mind protects routine first, regardless of whether the routine improves or limits the person. There is also a deeper layer, identity preservation. The mind prefers the person to remain consistent with past behavior. If someone has long considered themselves shy, starting conversations feels unnatural, almost dishonest. The mind resists because change threatens the stability of self-image. It prefers a stable identity over an evolving one. Even negative labels feel secure because they are predictable. A person may unconsciously maintain behaviors that confirm old beliefs about themselves. By doing so, they avoid the uncertainty of redefining who they are. Growth demands a new identity, and a new identity requires letting go of a familiar story. The mind hesitates, choosing psychological continuity over expansion. Another example appears in learning. When adults attempt new skills, frustration arises quickly. They compare their beginner level to others' proficiency and feel discouraged. The mind interprets this discomfort as evidence they should stop. Yet discomfort is not a signal of misdirection. It is the sensation of adaptation. The brain is reorganizing patterns, and unfamiliarity produces tension. The mind would rather return to activities where competence already exists, because competence feels safe. The person then abandons learning and concludes they lack talent. In truth, they encountered the normal discomfort of development and misinterpreted it as inability. The protection of comfort explains procrastination as well. People often delay important tasks, not because they are careless, but because the task contains emotional exposure. Starting requires confronting uncertainty, effort, and possible judgment. The mind seeks immediate relief from that tension, so it offers alternative activities that feel productive but require no risk. Checking messages, reorganizing plans, or researching endlessly provide temporary ease. The person remains busy but unmoved. They later criticize themselves for lack of discipline, unaware the mind successfully avoided discomfort by redirecting attention to harmless activity. Interestingly, once a person begins action despite resistance, the mind gradually changes sides. After repeated exposure, the unfamiliar becomes familiar. The same mind that resisted now supports the behavior. What once required effort becomes normal routine. This reveals an important truth. The mind does not oppose growth itself. It opposes unfamiliarity. When growth becomes familiar, the mind protects it as strongly as it once resisted it. Discipline succeeds because it repeats action long enough for the mind to accept a new comfort zone. The person then feels motivated, believing inspiration appeared, when actually familiarity replaced fear. Understanding this removes self-blame. Many people think they lack strength of character, but often they are experiencing a natural psychological mechanism. The mind's design is cautious, not visionary. It aims to reduce immediate discomfort, not maximize long-term potential. Without awareness, a person obeys this instinct automatically. With awareness, they can gently act despite resistance. They learn to expect hesitation, rather than interpret it as a warning. FW. A rebuilding life begins the moment a person stops negotiating with comfort and starts cooperating with growth. They realize resistance is not a command, but a reaction. Each small action teaches the mind a new normal. Slowly the internal dialogue changes. Instead of asking, "Is this safe?" the mind learns to accept. This is familiar now. The person no longer waits to feel ready, because readiness is not a prerequisite, it is a result. By choosing action while discomfort is present, they guide the mind toward expansion. Comfort then follows growth rather than preventing it, and a life once static begins to move quietly forward. Chapter 3. Your past is memory, not identity. Many people carry their past as if it were a permanent label attached to their existence. They introduce themselves internally, using old descriptions: the one who failed, the one who quit, the one who chose wrongly. These statements feel factual because they are based on real events, yet an event is not a definition. The past records what happened, not what must continue happening. Still, the mind prefers certainty, and identity built from memory feels certain. It allows the person to predict themselves, even if the prediction limits them. They believe change would contradict reality, when in truth it would update it. A moment from years ago silently governs present behavior because it was emotionally intense. The mind saved it carefully and replayed it often. Gradually, the memory became a conclusion about who they are. They stopped asking who they might become and began explaining who they once were. Memory itself is not a perfect archive. It is selective and interpretive. Two people can experience the same event and remember different meanings from it. The mind keeps the emotional impact more than the factual detail. If an early effort ended painfully, the person remembers not only the outcome, but the feeling of embarrassment or disappointment. Over time, the feeling becomes attached to the activity itself. They no longer see a single failed attempt. They see evidence of personal limitation. Yet the memory reflects their younger understanding, not their present capacity. The person has changed, learned and matured, but the memory remains frozen. By trusting that frozen image, they judge today's possibilities using yesterday's awareness. There is a subtle difference between remembering and identifying. Remembering allows learning, while identifying restricts growth. When someone says, "I failed before," they are acknowledging experience. When they say, "I am a failure," they are transforming experience into identity. The event becomes a self-definition. From that point, every new opportunity feels like a contradiction to their established self. The mind avoids contradictions, so it avoids effort. The person protects the identity because it feels consistent. Ironically, they remain loyal to an outdated version of themselves. They would rather be predictable than free, even if predictability keeps them confined. A small story illustrates this. A man once tried to learn public speaking in his youth and spoke poorly in front of a classroom. The memory embarrassed him deeply. Years passed, and he never volunteered to speak again. At work he avoided presentations, though he had valuable ideas. He explained his silence simply. "I am not a speaker," but what he truly meant was, "I once spoke badly." The event lasted minutes, yet its interpretation lasted decades. The memory did not prevent him from speaking. His identification with it did. He treated a temporary inability as a permanent trait. Only when he spoke again, trembling but determined, did he discover the old moment had never defined him. It had only influenced his belief. The past often feels powerful because it is certain. The future is unknown, but the past is complete. The mind trusts what is complete. It uses certainty to create stability. However, certainty is not always truth. The person remembers a pattern and assumes it will repeat because repetition feels logical. Yet life rarely repeats exactly. Every year changes perspective, skill, and emotional resilience. What was overwhelming once may now be manageable, but if they believe the past predicts the future absolutely, they never test the present. They accept limitation without verification. Another difficulty is guilt. Some memories are not merely disappointing but painful because they involve mistakes that hurt themselves or others. The person believes they must remain defined by those errors to prove sincerity. They think letting go means denying responsibility. In reality, growth requires both acknowledgement and movement. Responsibility is learning and behaving differently, not eternally repeating self-punishment. When guilt becomes identity, improvement feels undeserved. The person unconsciously avoids progress because they believe they should not be allowed relief. Yet a mistake describes a past action, not a permanent character. The lesson is meant to guide behavior, not imprison the self. Social reactions strengthen identification. If others once treated someone as unreliable or incapable, those impressions linger. The person begins to adopt the same view, repeating externally given labels internally. Over time, they forget the origin of the belief. It feels self-discovered, though it was inherited. People often live according to outdated opinions once spoken about them. They behave consistently with expectations because consistency feels stable. Yet those opinions were formed under different circumstances. Holding them now keeps the person aligned with a past environment rather than a present reality. Memory also exaggerates permanence. Because past events cannot be changed, the mind assumes their meaning cannot change either, but meaning evolves with understanding. A difficult experience that once seemed purely negative may later reveal lessons, strength, or direction. When reinterpreted, the same memory becomes a teacher instead of a judge. The event remains, but its authority weakens. The person realizes the past is information, not instruction. It offers perspective without issuing commands about what must happen next. There comes a quiet realization in rebuilding. The present self is always newer than the remembered self. Even a day changes perception slightly. When a person acts differently today, they produce a new memory that gradually replaces the old narrative. Identity begins to update not through thinking, but through action. Each new behavior communicates to the mind, "I am not limited to what happened before." Slowly the internal story shifts. The past loses its dominance, because the present accumulates evidence of change. Many people wait to feel different before acting differently. They hope identity will change first and behavior will follow, yet identity is shaped by repeated behavior. When they choose a new action, even uncertainly, they begin creating a different description of themselves. The mind records recent patterns more strongly than distant ones when they are consistent. By living new experiences, they give memory new material. Over time, yesterday's definition fades simply because it is no longer accurate. Letting the past remain memory rather than identity brings relief. The person stops arguing with old moments and instead acknowledges them calmly. They do not erase history, they reposition it. The past becomes a chapter read and understood, not a sentence still being written. They see they are not denying what happened, but refusing to let it dictate what continues. The self is not a fixed conclusion. It is a process shaped daily by attention and action. When this understanding settles, rebuilding becomes possible. The person no longer asks whether they deserve to change. They recognize that change is natural. Life continuously moves forward, and identity is meant to move with it. The past explains where they began, but it cannot decide where they go. They act today not to escape history, but to update it. And gradually, a new narrative forms, one where memory informs wisdom, but no longer controls destiny. Chapter 4. Regret can become direction. Regret is one of the most misunderstood emotions a person experiences. Most people treat it as proof they damaged their life permanently, yet regret is actually evidence of awareness. You cannot regret something you never cared about. The feeling appears only when your present understanding becomes clearer than your past understanding. It is the mind noticing a difference between who you were and who you are becoming. But instead of seeing this as growth, many people interpret it as punishment. They revisit the same decision repeatedly, imagining alternate outcomes, and each time the pain strengthens, they think the emotion is telling them they are broken. In truth, regret is not announcing ruin, it is announcing learning. The discomfort does not exist to trap you in the past. It exists to point you toward a different future. A person often believes regret demands correction of the past. They wish to return to a moment and choose differently. Because this is impossible, they feel powerless. They sit mentally inside old situations, negotiating with memories that cannot respond. But regret was never designed to repair yesterday. It was designed to influence tomorrow. Its purpose is guidance, not reversal. The mind produces a clear signal. This path did not align with your deeper values. Yet instead of using the signal, people keep analyzing the old event. They search for emotional closure inside memory, when closure exists only in changed behavior. The mind is waiting for a new decision, not a perfect explanation. There is a quiet shift when someone begins to listen to regret differently. Instead of asking, "Why did I do that?" they ask, "What is this teaching me now?" The question changes the direction of thought. Regret transforms from accusation into instruction. The person notices patterns. Perhaps they ignored intuition, avoided responsibility, or acted from fear. The lesson becomes clear. Once understood, the emotion loses some of its heaviness because it now has purpose. Pain without meaning feels unbearable, but pain that guides behavior feels valuable. The same memory that once weakened them begins strengthening awareness. Many adults carry a specific regret related to opportunities they avoided. They remember the moment they almost began something meaningful but withdrew. They explain it by circumstances, timing, or lack of readiness. Over years, the moment becomes symbolic, representing a lost life they imagine could have existed. Yet the opportunity itself was never the true loss. The real message was about hesitation. Regret is not telling them they needed that exact moment. It is showing them they need courage in the present moment. The direction is not backward toward the missed chance. It is forward toward the next one. Regret also reveals values clearly. A person may feel strong regret after neglecting relationships, health, or personal integrity. These feelings identify what truly matters to them. Without regret, they might continue unconsciously. The emotion acts like an internal compass correcting direction. It does not condemn the traveler. It redirects them. When understood this way, regret becomes almost protective. It prevents repetition. The person begins making small adjustments, apologizing, caring more attentively, or choosing honesty sooner. They are not undoing the past, but they are ensuring it does not repeat. Some people resist using regret because they fear the emotion itself. They distract themselves quickly, hoping to forget. For a time this works, but the lesson remains unlearned, so similar situations appear again. Life repeats patterns until awareness forms. When the person finally pauses and listens, they see the pattern clearly. The regret was persistent not to cause suffering, but to demand understanding. Once the understanding is accepted, repetition fades. The past becomes a teacher rather than a recurring problem. Another important realization emerges. Regret measures consciousness, not worth. The fact that someone regrets deeply means their values matured. Their earlier actions belong to a less aware version of themselves. Condemning the present self for past ignorance is unnecessary. Growth requires compassion toward former mistakes. Without that compassion, the person stays emotionally tied to yesterday. They must acknowledge, I did not know then what I know now. From this acceptance, responsibility becomes constructive rather than destructive. There is a story of a woman who spent years in a career chosen only to please expectations. She felt persistent dissatisfaction but ignored it. Decades later, she regretted not pursuing creative work she loved. For a long time she repeated, I wasted my life. Eventually she changed the sentence to, I now understand what matters to me. She began small creative projects after work. Nothing dramatic happened immediately, but the regret softened. The feeling had transformed into direction. The same awareness that once hurt her now guided her daily choices. Action is what completes regret's purpose. When a person changes behavior, even slightly, the mind receives reassurance. The emotion gradually quiets because it achieved its role. Without action, regret lingers because the signal remains unanswered. People often wait for the feeling to disappear before acting, but the feeling disappears after acting. Movement resolves what thinking cannot. The past does not need to be corrected for peace to begin. The present needs to be used. Rebuilding a life frequently starts not with inspiration, but with reflection on past dissatisfaction. The person recognizes a pattern they no longer wish to continue. Regret becomes the beginning of intention. They plan differently, speak differently, and choose differently. Each new decision weakens the hold of old memory. The emotion changes character. Instead of sadness, it becomes clarity. Instead of heaviness, it becomes guidance. Gradually, the person realizes regret was never their enemy. It was the mind's honest communication. Without it, they might repeat unconscious habits endlessly. It gave them information about alignment between actions and values. The discomfort was simply the urgency of the message. By listening rather than resisting, they converted pain into direction. In the end, regret does not exist to keep someone attached to the past. It exists to release them from repeating it. When understood, it becomes a map pointing forward. The person stops asking how life could have been and starts shaping how life will be. What once felt like a burden becomes momentum. The past remains unchanged, yet the future opens, guided by lessons the heart finally accepts. Chapter 5. Small changes quietly rebuild a life. People often imagine rebuilding a life, requires a dramatic turning point, a single powerful decision that instantly transforms everything. Because of this belief, they wait. They wait for motivation, for clarity, for a perfect moment that feels undeniable. But real change rarely announces itself loudly. It begins in small, almost unnoticeable adjustments. A different morning routine, a brief walk, a decision to read instead of scrolling, or a choice to respond calmly instead of reacting quickly. These actions feel insignificant at first, so the person doubts them. They expect immediate emotional reward, yet small changes do not produce immediate excitement. They produce stability. Over time, stability becomes direction, and direction becomes progress. The life does not suddenly rebuild in one visible shift. It reorganizes quietly, step by step, until one day the person looks around and notices they are living differently without remembering the exact day it started. The mind struggles to respect small actions because it prefers visible outcomes. When effort does not immediately change circumstances, the person concludes it is ineffective. Yet small actions operate differently. They do not instantly change the outside world. They change the person performing them. Waking slightly earlier may not alter life in a week, but it alters awareness. A few minutes of reflection may not solve problems, but it improves attention. These internal adjustments accumulate. The person's thinking becomes clearer, their reactions slower, and their decisions more intentional. The environment eventually responds, but only after the individual has changed first. People abandon small habits because they measure them against immediate results instead of long-term influence. Consider how a building is repaired. Workers do not replace the entire structure in one day. They strengthen the foundation, repair weak sections, and reinforce stability piece by piece. A life rebuilds in the same manner. Each small behavior strengthens psychological structure. A person who keeps a simple promise to themselves each day restores trust in their own reliability. That trust gradually replaces self-doubt. From trust comes courage, and from courage comes larger change. The early actions appear minor, yet they repair the most important element, the relationship a person has with themselves. There is a quiet story of a man who decided only to make his bed each morning after a long period of disorganization. He chose this because it was small enough to complete daily. At first the action seemed meaningless, but after weeks he noticed he felt different. Beginning the day with a completed task created order in his mind. He started cleaning one corner of his room, then organizing his schedule. Months later, he was exercising and studying consistently. The bed itself did not change his life. The consistency changed his identity. One reliable action convinced him he could rely on himself again. Small changes succeed because they avoid overwhelming the mind. Large, sudden plans activate resistance. The person attempts too much at once, becomes exhausted, and returns to old patterns. The mind interprets this as proof change is impossible. Small actions bypass that resistance. They are manageable, so the mind accepts them. Repetition then forms familiarity, and familiarity reduces effort. Eventually the behavior becomes automatic. What once required discipline now requires little energy. The person did not become stronger through force, but through gradual adaptation. Another important effect occurs internally. Each completed small action sends a quiet message: you are capable of guiding your behavior. The mind records evidence rather than promises. Confidence grows not from intention, but from proof. When someone repeatedly completes minor commitments, they accumulate proof daily. This proof becomes self-respect. Self-respect is powerful because it influences future decisions. The person begins choosing actions consistent with their improved self-image. A life shifts because identity shifts. Patience becomes essential in this process. Many abandon small changes because progress feels invisible. Growth often happens below awareness before appearing externally. Just as roots grow beneath soil before a plant rises, habits strengthen before results appear. During this stage, the person may feel nothing is happening. In reality, stability is forming. If they continue, results eventually surface naturally. If they stop early, the process resets. The difference between transformation and stagnation is often simple persistence during the unseen phase. Small changes also reshape perception. When daily behavior becomes intentional, the person notices opportunities previously ignored. They begin managing time more carefully, choosing environments more thoughtfully, and avoiding distractions more easily. These adjustments seem unrelated to original habits, but arise from increased awareness. A single consistent practice improves attention, and improved attention improves decision-making. The outside life changes because perception changed first. There is another subtle shift: emotional regulation improves. A person who practices small self-control daily reacts differently under pressure. They pause before speaking, think before deciding, and recover from setbacks faster. They no longer depend entirely on motivation. Their stability comes from routine. Difficult moments still occur, but they no longer derail progress completely. Consistency provides psychological grounding. Life remains complex, yet the individual remains steady. Over time, others begin noticing changes before the person does. Friends observe increased reliability or calmness. Opportunities appear because consistent behavior builds trust. The person feels surprised, thinking nothing significant was done. Yet many small actions created a visible pattern. The world responds to patterns, not intentions. Because the individual became predictable in effort, life became more cooperative. Importantly, small changes are sustainable. Dramatic transformation often collapses because it relies on emotional intensity. Intensity fades, habit remains. By focusing on manageable actions, the person ensures continuation even during low motivation. The system supports them when feelings fluctuate. Rebuilding becomes independent of mood. Progress continues quietly, regardless of temporary discouragement. Eventually, the person understands a profound truth. A life is not rebuilt by one decision, but by repeated direction. Each day's small behavior casts a vote for the kind of person they are becoming. The votes accumulate. Weeks turn into months, and months into years. The new life feels natural because it was constructed gradually. It did not arrive suddenly. It formed steadily. In the end, small changes succeed because they respect human nature. They work with the mind instead of against it. By choosing consistent, manageable actions, a person rewrites their daily experience. The transformation seems gentle, yet it is powerful. Without dramatic announcements, their days reorganize, their confidence returns, and their future expands. A life quietly rebuilds, one deliberate action at a time. Chapter say, discipline is more powerful than motivation. Many people wait for motivation before beginning important work. They imagine a day when energy rises naturally and effort feels easy. On certain mornings this happens, and progress flows quickly. But these moments are inconsistent. The following day the feeling disappears, and the task remains untouched. Over time they conclude they lack drive, when in reality they are relying on a condition that was never stable. Motivation is emotional, and emotion changes constantly. It responds to sleep, weather, mood, and circumstances. Building a life on motivation alone is like building on moving ground. Discipline operates differently. It does not depend on emotion. It depends on decision. A disciplined person does not begin because they feel ready. They begin because they decided the action matters. The power lies in continuity. Even small efforts repeated during ordinary days gradually outperform intense effort that appears only during inspired moments. Motivation feels attractive because it is comfortable. When motivated, work feels aligned with desire. There is no internal resistance. But this comfort hides a problem. Motivation cannot be summoned reliably. A person may genuinely want change, yet still feel unwilling to act on certain days. They interpret this as a personal flaw, but it is a natural fluctuation of the mind. Discipline removes this confusion. It separates action from emotion. The person decides in advance what they will do, and then follows the decision regardless of mood. The first attempts feel mechanical and even dull, yet consistency begins forming. Soon they notice something surprising. After starting without motivation, motivation sometimes appears during the work itself. Action created the feeling, not the other way around. A useful example is exercise. Many promise to begin when they feel energetic. Weeks pass because the body rarely offers enthusiasm at the beginning. The disciplined individual acts differently. They schedule a short session and start whether enthusiasm exists or not. The first minutes feel heavy, but movement awakens the body. Afterward, they feel better than before they started. The mind learns an important lesson. Readiness often follows action. By acting first, they bypass the emotional negotiation that previously delayed them. Over months, physical strength grows not because every session felt inspiring, but because sessions occurred regularly. Discipline also strengthens trust in oneself. When someone keeps commitments only during favorable moods, they subconsciously know they are unreliable. They hesitate to set meaningful goals because they doubt their own follow-through. Each broken promise weakens self-confidence. Discipline reverses this pattern. By completing small tasks consistently, the person collects evidence of reliability. The mind begins believing, "I do what I say I will do." This belief influences every area of life. Decisions become clearer because they trust their ability to act. Self-respect increases quietly as promises are honored. Motivation focuses on outcomes, while discipline focuses on process. A motivated person imagines results, success, recognition, or improvement. When results are slow, enthusiasm fades. The disciplined person concentrates on daily behavior. They measure success by completion of the action, not by immediate reward. Because they can control actions but not outcomes, they maintain stability. Ironically, this stability produces results more reliably than excitement does. By valuing the process, they allow results to develop naturally. There is a small story of a writer who wished to publish a book, but waited for inspiration. Months passed with little progress. Eventually, he chose a different approach. He wrote one page each morning at the same hour, regardless of mood. Many mornings the words felt ordinary, yet he continued. After a year, he had a manuscript. He realized the book did not come from a single inspired period. It came from ordinary mornings repeated consistently. Discipline produced what inspiration alone never could. Discipline reduces mental debate. When behavior is optional, the mind negotiates endlessly: start now or later, today or tomorrow. This internal conversation drains energy before work even begins. A fixed routine removes the debate. The decision is already made. The person simply follows it. By removing daily negotiation, they conserve attention for the task itself. Life becomes simpler because fewer choices require emotional evaluation. Another effect is emotional stability. When progress depends on motivation, a person experiences cycles of enthusiasm and disappointment. Productive days feel successful, and unproductive days feel like failure. Discipline evens these extremes. Because action continues regardless of mood, progress becomes steady. The person stops judging themselves harshly for fluctuating feelings. They understand that feelings are temporary, but behavior can remain constant. This understanding brings calmness to effort. Discipline does not eliminate difficulty. Some days remain challenging. The difference is that difficulty no longer stops movement. The individual learns that discomfort is not a signal to stop but a normal part of effort. By continuing through ordinary resistance, they expand tolerance for challenge. Tasks that once seemed intimidating become manageable simply through repetition. The mind adapts to what it practices. Importantly, discipline eventually generates motivation. After consistent action, visible improvement appears. Improvement produces satisfaction, and satisfaction encourages further effort. The person now experiences motivation more often, but it is a result of discipline, not a prerequisite. They no longer depend on feeling to begin. Feeling accompanies progress naturally. Rebuilding a life requires reliability more than enthusiasm. Large plans fail when they lack daily execution. Discipline provides execution. Even on difficult days, the person maintains minimal progress. Small steps accumulate into significant change. They may not feel extraordinary each day, yet their direction remains clear. In time, the individual realizes discipline is not restrictive. It is freeing. By committing to consistent actions, they no longer wait for perfect emotional conditions. They control what they can, their behavior. This control restores confidence. Life moves forward steadily, not dramatically but dependably. Motivation still visits, but it is no longer necessary. The foundation of progress becomes habit, and through habit a new future steadily forms. There is a moment each day when a person faces a small private choice that no one else will notice. The alarm rings, a task appears, or a responsibility quietly waits. In that instant, the mind begins a gentle negotiation. It suggests postponement, comfort, and exceptions. Nothing dramatic is happening. No crisis exists. Yet this ordinary moment determines direction more than any major decision. Motivation would act only when the feeling is pleasant. Discipline acts even when the moment feels neutral or inconvenient. The difference seems minor, but repetition magnifies it. A person who repeatedly chooses the action teaches their mind that behavior is not controlled by mood. Slowly, the internal conversation weakens. The choice becomes simpler. They no longer depend on a burst of energy to begin. Instead, they depend on a principle. What matters is done, whether enthusiasm accompanies it or not. At first, discipline feels restrictive because it removes the freedom to avoid effort. A person may resist schedules and routines, thinking they limit spontaneity, yet avoidance is not freedom. Avoidance often produces quiet anxiety because unfinished responsibilities remain present in the background of the mind. Discipline reduces this hidden tension. By completing necessary tasks early or regularly, mental space clears. The person experiences a calm satisfaction, not from excitement but from order. They discover that structure does not imprison them. It supports them. When important actions are handled reliably, the rest of the day feels lighter. Leisure becomes enjoyable rather than guilty because nothing urgent is being ignored. Some imagined disciplined people feel constantly serious or rigid. In reality, they simply reduce indecision. Indecision consumes attention. Each postponed task continues occupying thought, returning again and again. The disciplined individual experiences fewer repeated reminders because actions are addressed quickly. This produces a quiet confidence. They trust that challenges will be handled when they appear. Confidence does not come from believing problems are small, but from knowing response will be consistent. Life becomes less overwhelming because responsibilities are not accumulating beyond control. There is a small example in learning. A student once attempted to study only during bursts of interest. Some weeks he studied intensely, then stopped entirely. His knowledge remained uneven, and he felt discouraged. Later he studied briefly every day at a fixed time. The sessions were short and often ordinary, yet understanding deepened steadily. The improvement surprised him. He realized discipline produced familiarity, and familiarity produced ease. The subject no longer felt intimidating because daily exposure removed uncertainty. The regularity mattered more than the intensity. Discipline also changes how a person perceives effort. Without it, effort feels like a special event requiring preparation and emotional readiness. With discipline, effort becomes routine. Brushing teeth does not require motivation because it is habitual. Important actions can become similar. When behavior is repeated long enough, the mind stops evaluating whether to do it. It simply proceeds. What once required willpower becomes automatic. The person conserves energy because fewer actions demand conscious decision. Another benefit appears during difficulty. When unexpected stress occurs, motivated behavior often stops entirely because emotional energy is low. Disciplined habits continue at a reduced but steady pace. Even minimal progress preserves direction. The individual does not feel they lost everything because continuity remains. This continuity protects long-term progress from temporary setbacks. Instead of restarting repeatedly, they continue forward gradually. Discipline also strengthens patience. Results rarely appear immediately, and waiting tests resolve. A disciplined person expects delay and accepts it calmly. They measure success by adherence to the process rather than speed of outcome. This mindset prevents discouragement. They see slow progress as normal rather than disappointing. Because expectations are realistic, persistence becomes easier. Another quiet effect is improved focus. When a person practices doing what they planned without distraction, attention stabilizes. The mind becomes less reactive to impulses. Notifications, moods, and sudden desires lose some influence. The person remains present with the task. This concentration increases efficiency, so tasks require less time. Ironically, discipline creates more free time because effort is directed and uninterrupted. Discipline influences relationships as well. Reliability builds trust. When someone consistently fulfills promises, others feel secure depending on them. Opportunities appear because people respect dependability. The disciplined person does not chase recognition. Recognition emerges naturally from steady behavior. Reputation becomes aligned with action rather than intention. It also reduces emotional extremes. When progress depends on excitement, emotions fluctuate dramatically. Productive days feel victorious. Unproductive days feel discouraging. Discipline stabilizes this cycle. Each day includes meaningful effort regardless of emotional state. Satisfaction becomes steady rather than dramatic. The person feels balanced instead of oscillating between pride and frustration. Over time, disciplined behavior shapes identity. The individual stops describing themselves as someone who tries and begins describing themselves as someone who follows through. This shift is subtle but powerful. Decisions become easier because they act consistently with their self-image. They no longer debate whether to act. They see action as natural. Interestingly, discipline does not eliminate enjoyment. It often increases it. By completing necessary tasks early, leisure becomes genuine rest. Activities feel rewarding because they are chosen, not used as avoidance. The mind relaxes completely when responsibilities are handled. Rest becomes deeper and more refreshing. Another change occurs in how challenges are perceived. Difficult tasks once appeared threatening. After repeated disciplined effort, difficulty becomes familiar. The person trusts their capacity to endure temporary discomfort. Fear reduces because experience replaced imagination. Confidence grows not from thinking positively, but from evidence collected daily. Gradually, Discipline transforms time perception. Days feel purposeful rather than repetitive. Each action contributes to a larger direction. Even small efforts feel meaningful because they connect to long-term intention. The person senses progress even when results remain modest. Direction itself becomes satisfying. In the end, discipline is not harsh control but consistent guidance. It removes reliance on unstable feelings and replaces it with dependable behavior. Through ordinary daily actions, the individual constructs stability and self-respect. They realize motivation is welcome but unnecessary. What shapes their life is not how strongly they feel in a moment, but how steadily they act across many moments. Chapter 7. Detaching from other people's timelines. From childhood, people begin hearing quiet expectations about when life should unfold. Certain ages are associated with certain achievements: education completed by one stage, stability by another, success by another still. These expectations are rarely spoken as strict rules, yet they settle deeply into the mind. A person does not notice when they accepted them. They simply grow up measuring their progress against invisible clocks. When they reach a certain age, and their life does not resemble what they imagined, unease appears. They do not always know why they feel behind, only that they do. The discomfort does not come from actual failure. It comes from comparison with an internal schedule that was never personally chosen. They begin evaluating their life as late instead of simply different. Comparison intensifies this feeling. Watching others reach milestones earlier creates pressure. A friend's success, a colleague's promotion, or someone's stable life appears like evidence of personal delay. The person forgets they are seeing only a moment of another story, not the entire narrative. Every life contains unseen struggles, sacrifices, and timing, unique to individual circumstances. Yet the mind simplifies what it observes. It assumes that visible progress represents the correct pace. Instead of asking what direction suits them, they ask why they are not matching someone else's progress. Their attention moves away from personal growth and toward external measurement. This measurement changes decisions. Instead of choosing based on meaning, a person chooses based on speed. They rush into commitments because others have them. They pursue paths that look appropriate rather than paths that feel authentic. The result is subtle dissatisfaction. Even when they reach certain milestones, the relief fades quickly because the achievement did not originate from personal intention. It came from pressure. They reached a destination without choosing the journey, and the mind senses the mismatch. Detaching from these timelines requires a quiet realization. Life is not a race, but a sequence of experiences. Growth does not occur simultaneously for everyone. Some lessons appear early, others late. Timing is influenced by personality, environment, and awareness. A person who learns patience at 40 is not late. They learned when they were ready to understand it deeply. When viewed this way, age becomes context rather than judgment. The individual stops asking whether they are behind and starts asking whether they are aligned with their values. A small story reflects this truth. A man once worried he began his studies too late compared to younger classmates. At first he felt embarrassed sitting among people years younger, but he noticed something unexpected. His maturity helped him focus. He understood concepts faster because life experience gave them meaning. What once seemed delay became advantage. His earlier path prepared him differently. He was not late. He arrived with perspective. Others did not yet have. Detaching from others' timelines also restores attention. When comparison fades, mental energy returns to personal progress. Instead of observing others constantly, the person observes themselves. They notice improvement that previously felt invisible because it was not immediate or dramatic. Small, consistent growth becomes satisfying. They begin to appreciate direction more than speed. Progress measured internally feels calmer than progress measured socially. Social expectations often come from collective habits rather than individual truth. Societies create average paths for organization, but individuals live unique realities. Following an average path does not guarantee fulfillment. Some people succeed early and feel empty. Others begin late and feel peaceful. The difference is not timing but alignment between actions and values. Recognizing this frees the person from rigid expectations. They understand there is no universal schedule for meaning. Another important change occurs emotionally. When people compare constantly, envy and insecurity appear. They interpret another person's success as evidence of their own inadequacy. Once they detach from timelines, another person's progress becomes neutral or even inspiring. They see it as possibility rather than competition. Relationships become supportive rather than tense because comparison no longer defines self-worth. Patience naturally develops during this process. The person accepts that meaningful growth requires time. They stop rushing decisions simply to appear synchronized with others. Careful choices replace hurried ones. Ironically, by slowing down, they often avoid mistakes that haste would create. Their life becomes steadier because actions are intentional rather than reactive. Detachment does not mean isolation. The person still learns from others, but they no longer measure themselves against them. They use examples as guidance instead of judgment. Advice becomes useful rather than threatening. They remain connected socially while internally independent. This balance allows both community and individuality. Eventually, a deeper peace appears. The person recognizes that existence itself has no fixed deadlines for becoming wiser, calmer, or more purposeful. Many realizations require experience that cannot be rushed. Understanding comes when awareness matures. By accepting personal timing, they allow development to occur naturally instead of forcing it. In the end, releasing other people's timelines changes perspective entirely. The individual stops evaluating life as early or late and begins seeing it as unfolding. Each step belongs to its own moment. When they walk at their own pace, direction becomes clear. What once felt like delay reveals itself as preparation. They realize their life was never behind. It was simply following a rhythm that was always uniquely their own. There is a subtle pressure that enters a person's mind when they notice how often age is mentioned in conversations. Questions appear casually. What are you doing now? Where are you settled? What have you achieved so far? None of these are meant to harm, yet they quietly introduce a measurement. A person begins organizing their self-worth around a number rather than a direction. They calculate what they should have already done instead of noticing what they are learning now. The mind starts treating time as a judge. Each birthday feels less like a continuation and more like an evaluation. Yet time does not evaluate. It only moves. The judgment is self-created, based on imagined expectations. When a person recognizes this, the pressure weakens. They understand they were responding not to reality but to interpretation. Many people do not feel anxious until they observe peers progressing differently. Before comparison, their path feels natural. After comparison, it feels delayed. The difference lies not in their life, but in their focus. By constantly watching others, they stop observing their own growth. Their attention shifts outward, and satisfaction fades. They may be improving steadily, but improvement seems invisible because it does not resemble someone else's timeline. The mind interprets difference as deficiency. Yet two paths can move in different directions and still be meaningful. The discomfort comes from assuming one pattern must fit everyone. Detaching begins when a person questions the origin of their expectations. Often they realize the timeline they follow was never consciously chosen. It was inherited from culture, family habits, or social repetition. They followed it automatically because it appeared normal. Once they notice this, they gain distance from it. Expectations lose authority when they are examined. The person sees they were measuring themselves against a borrowed standard rather than a personal intention. That recognition alone reduces shame. They no longer feel defective for living differently. They feel curious about what genuinely suits them. There is a quiet freedom in choosing direction instead of speed. When speed dominates, decisions become hurried. A person accepts unsuitable opportunities just to keep pace. Later, they feel trapped by choices made under pressure. By focusing on direction, they choose carefully. Progress may appear slower externally, yet their internal stability increases. They are building a life rather than chasing an image. The difference becomes clear over years. What looked fast once becomes unstable, while what looked slow becomes strong. A young woman once worried she was late starting a new profession. She hesitated constantly, thinking she should have begun earlier. Eventually she realized she was not competing with anyone. She was only deciding how to spend her remaining time. That thought shifted everything. Instead of asking why she had not started before, she asked whether she wished to continue waiting. The answer was simple. She began immediately. Her progress felt peaceful because it came from decision, not pressure. Another effect of detachment is improved attention. Without constant comparison, the mind becomes quieter. Energy once spent analyzing others returns to personal effort. The person notices daily opportunities for improvement. Small learning becomes satisfying again. They become present in their own life rather than mentally living inside someone else's achievements. This presence creates a sense of participation instead of observation. Social timelines often ignore unseen preparation. Many people develop skills privately for years before visible success appears. Observers notice only the moment of recognition and assume it happened quickly. This illusion strengthens pressure unnecessarily. The person comparing themselves to visible outcomes overlooks invisible development. When they understand this, they realize visible progress is often delayed expression of long internal work. Patience becomes easier because they see growth differently. Detaching also changes conversations with oneself. Instead of harsh questions like "Why am I behind?" gentler questions appear. What step matters today? The focus moves from evaluation to action. Daily effort replaces abstract worry. The person begins living in the present moment rather than an imagined race. Progress becomes practical instead of theoretical. Another benefit is emotional independence. Approval from others becomes less essential. The person no longer needs constant reassurance that they are on schedule. Their satisfaction comes from alignment with their own values. They still appreciate encouragement, but their motivation no longer depends on it. This independence reduces anxiety significantly. When people release comparison, they rediscover curiosity. They explore interests without calculating how late they began. Learning becomes enjoyable again because it is no longer tied to status. The mind relaxes and absorbs information more deeply. Growth accelerates naturally when pressure disappears. There is also relief in realizing life has multiple seasons. Some years are for learning, some for building, and others for stabilizing. Expecting all achievements at one stage ignores this rhythm. By respecting different phases, the person stops forcing outcomes prematurely. They allow experiences to mature at their own pace. Gradually, self-respect grows. The person honors their own path, even when it differs from common patterns. They understand that meaning cannot be synchronized across millions of lives. Individual understanding appears at different times. Accepting this makes them calmer around others' success. Admiration replaces insecurity. Another realization emerges: comparison steals appreciation. While watching others, a person overlooks their own progress. Detachment restores gratitude. They notice skills they developed, resilience they gained, and insight they earned through experience. These qualities were always present, but hidden behind comparison. Eventually, the idea of being late loses significance. The person stops viewing life as a schedule and begins viewing it as a journey of awareness. They walk steadily, attentive to each step, rather than the distance between themselves and others. Their confidence comes from movement, not position. In the end, detaching from others' timelines brings peace because it restores ownership of time. The individual realizes they are not required to match another person's pace to live meaningfully. They only need to continue forward sincerely. Once they accept this, urgency softens, focus strengthens, and life feels like their own again, rather than an imitation of someone else's expectations. Chapter 8. Changing habits changes self-image. A person's self-image is rarely formed by a single event. It is built slowly through repeated behavior. Each day the mind observes what you do and quietly draws conclusions about who you are. If actions are inconsistent, the mind records inconsistency. If actions are reliable, it records reliability. People often try to improve confidence through positive thinking alone, but the mind trusts evidence more than encouragement. When behavior changes, perception changes naturally. The person who keeps small commitments begins seeing themselves differently. They no longer rely on hope to believe in themselves. They rely on proof gathered from their own actions. This shift feels subtle but powerful. Confidence stops being something they try to feel and becomes something they quietly recognize. Many individuals struggle with low confidence, not because they lack ability, but because their habits contradict their intentions. They plan carefully, promise improvement, and imagine progress, yet daily actions do not support those ideas. The mind notices the gap between intention and behavior. Over time, it stops trusting intentions. The person begins saying, "I am not disciplined," or "I cannot change," even though the real issue is repeated evidence of inconsistency. When a habit changes, that evidence changes. A single reliable action repeated every day communicates a new message. The mind updates its belief about the person's character. Consider the simple act of waking at a consistent time. At first it feels minor, almost insignificant. Yet when repeated, the mind begins recognizing a pattern. The person starts the day intentionally, rather than reactively. This creates a feeling of control. The morning no longer feels like something that happens to them. It feels like something they begin. That sense of control expands into other decisions. They approach tasks earlier, plan more carefully, and respond more calmly. One habit reshapes how they interpret their own behavior. There is a quiet story of a woman who began walking every evening for 20 minutes. She did not begin to lose weight or impress anyone. She began simply to keep a promise to herself. After several weeks, she noticed she was thinking differently. She described herself as someone who follows through. That description had never existed before. The walking mattered less than the consistency. Each step told her mind she was dependable. Soon she changed her diet, organized her workspace, and improved relationships. Her life changed not because walking solved problems, but because it changed how she saw herself. Habits act like mirrors. They reflect identity. When a person repeatedly avoids tasks, the mirror shows avoidance. When they act deliberately, it shows capability. The mind cannot ignore repeated evidence. Eventually, the internal narrative shifts. Instead of saying, "I wish I were different," they begin saying, "I am becoming different." This change feels authentic because it is supported by experience. The person trusts it because they witnessed it daily. Another important element is emotional reaction. Someone who practices patience intentionally, even in small moments, begins responding calmly in larger situations. After enough repetition, calmness feels natural. They no longer see themselves as easily overwhelmed. Their identity evolves from reactive to composed. Others notice the change before they do. External reactions reinforce the new self-image, strengthening belief further. Habits also reduce internal conflict. Many people live with tension between what they want and what they do. This tension produces self-criticism. When habits align with intentions, the tension fades. The person feels coherent. Their actions confirm their values. This harmony produces quiet peace. Self-respect appears not from perfection, but from alignment between decisions and behavior. Small habits are especially powerful because they are sustainable. Large, dramatic changes often collapse, and the collapse damages self-image. The person interprets failure as inability. Small habits succeed more often, and success accumulates. Each successful repetition strengthens identity gradually. Over time, the individual becomes someone who trusts their effort. The scale of the habit matters less than the consistency of completion. There is also a cognitive effect. The brain seeks consistency between belief and behavior. When actions improve, beliefs adjust automatically. The mind prefers a coherent story. If someone consistently studies daily, the brain begins labeling them as a learner. If they exercise regularly, the brain labels them as healthy. The labels follow behavior, not the other way around. Changing habit becomes the simplest path to changing identity. Importantly, habits influence decisions indirectly. When a person sees themselves as disciplined, they choose actions consistent with that image. They decline distractions more easily. They approach opportunities more confidently. The identity guides behavior, just as behavior once shaped identity. A positive cycle begins. Each action reinforces the next. Over time, the person notices they no longer argue internally before acting. Previously, every effort required persuasion. Now action feels normal. The mind does not resist, because the behavior matches self-image. Effort decreases even though results increase. What once required willpower now requires only attention. Rebuilding self-image requires patience. Old beliefs may persist initially, even after habits change, but repeated behavior gradually replaces them. The mind updates slowly, like a photograph developing in dim light. Eventually, the old image fades because it no longer matches reality. Another shift appears socially. Others respond to the person's consistency with trust. Trust strengthens confidence further. Opportunities appear because reliability attracts cooperation. The individual feels capable not from imagination, but from real interactions shaped by their behavior. The person eventually realizes identity is not discovered but constructed. They are not waiting to find who they are building it through daily repetition. Each small habit acts like a vote cast toward a particular self. Enough votes create certainty. In the end, changing habits changes more than routine. It changes perception, emotion, and direction. The person does not become confident first and act later. They act consistently and confidence follows. Through steady behavior, the mind learns a new story about who they are. That story, once established, quietly guides the future they create. A person often believes their personality is fixed, something discovered early and carried unchanged. They say, "This is just how I am," as if identity were a permanent object rather than a living pattern. Yet what they call personality is frequently a summary of repeated habits. If someone repeatedly avoids responsibility, they call themselves irresponsible. If they repeatedly practice patience, they call themselves calm. The description follows the behavior. The mind collects daily actions and forms a story that explains them. Because habits repeat quietly, the story feels permanent, but when behavior changes, the story must adjust. Identity is not a discovery from the past, it is a conclusion drawn from the present. There is a hidden influence in ordinary actions. The way someone speaks to others, organizes their environment, and responds to inconvenience all send signals to their own mind. These signals are small, yet constant. The mind does not wait for dramatic proof. It accepts repeated evidence. When a person begins finishing tasks they once avoided, even simple ones, their inner narrative shifts. They stop seeing themselves as incapable, not because someone praised them, but because their behavior demonstrated reliability. Self-image grows quietly from observation, not affirmation. Many try to change self-image through thought alone. They repeat encouraging statements, hoping belief will appear. While helpful briefly, these statements struggle against contradicting behavior. The mind notices inconsistency quickly. If actions oppose words, the words lose influence. But when actions support words, belief strengthens naturally. A person who plans carefully and follows through does not need to convince themselves they are organized. They experience it directly. The belief feels stable because it is grounded in experience. Another effect appears in how challenges are approached. Someone who practices solving small problems daily becomes more willing to face larger ones. They do not suddenly become fearless. Instead, they trust their capacity to learn. Their habits trained persistence. Because they overcame many minor difficulties, larger difficulties feel manageable. Their identity changes from someone who avoids challenge to someone who engages with it. This shift originates not in a motivational moment, but in repeated ordinary effort. The environment often reflects internal habits. A disordered routine usually produces a disordered space, while intentional behavior produces order. When a person begins maintaining a simple structure around them, their mind experiences clarity. External organization reduces internal distraction. The person begins associating themselves with stability. They feel composed not because life is simple, but because their actions are deliberate. The space they shape mirrors the self-image they develop. There is also a change in language. As habits evolve, the way a person speaks about themselves changes. They stop using phrases that predict failure. Instead, they describe process. They say, "I am learning," rather than "I cannot." This is not forced positivity. It is an accurate description supported by recent actions. Language adjusts to match experience. Words follow reality. Consistency teaches patience. When someone performs a habit repeatedly, they witness gradual improvement. This experience challenges the belief that change must be immediate. They learn that growth is cumulative. Their expectations become realistic. Instead of quitting when results are slow, they continue calmly. This patience becomes part of their self-image. They see themselves as steady rather than impulsive. Relationships shift as well. Reliable habits make behavior predictable. Others begin trusting their presence and effort. Positive feedback appears naturally, reinforcing new identity. The person notices they are treated differently because they behave differently. Their self-view strengthens through interaction. Identity is confirmed socially as well as internally. Mistakes also transform in meaning. Before habit change, errors confirmed negative beliefs. After habit change, errors become temporary interruptions. The person does not interpret a single failure as a permanent flaw. They see it as part of learning. Their habits created resilience. Because they act consistently, one setback cannot define them. Their self-image becomes flexible instead of fragile. Motivation begins to feel less important. Previously, they depended on excitement to act. Now behavior occurs routinely. They trust structure more than feeling. This trust produces calm confidence. They no longer worry about fluctuating moods controlling progress. Their identity includes reliability, independent of emotion. A deeper change occurs in decision-making. A person with constructive habits anticipates consequences more clearly. Their mind recognizes patterns because they practiced attention. Choices become intentional. They consider long-term effects naturally. Identity shifts from reactive to thoughtful. This alters life direction without dramatic effort. Even rest becomes healthier. When habits include purposeful work, relaxation feels earned and restorative. The person enjoys leisure without guilt. Balance appears naturally because both effort and recovery exist. They see themselves as balanced rather than overwhelmed. Their self-image now includes control over rhythm, not just activity. Confidence grows from predictability. Knowing they will act responsibly tomorrow reduces anxiety today. They trust their future behavior. This trust produces peace. They no longer rely on hope that they will change. They rely on evidence that they already have. Eventually, the person realizes the self they desired was not hidden, it was waiting to be practiced. Each repeated action shaped perception. Identity became the result of accumulated habits. By choosing behavior carefully, they shaped belief gradually. In the end, habits do more than influence routine. They define the relationship a person has with themselves. When behavior aligns with intention, self-image stabilizes. The individual no longer searches for confidence externally. They experience it internally, built from countless small actions performed consistently over time. Chapter 9. Letting go of the person you outgrew. Growth is often imagined as gaining something new, yet it frequently begins by releasing something old. A person changes gradually, learning through experience, reflection, and small decisions. But even after change begins internally, they may continue behaving according to an outdated version of themselves. They remember who they were years ago and unconsciously protect that image. It feels familiar, and familiarity feels safe. Letting go becomes difficult, not because the past is valuable, but because it is known. The mind prefers a stable identity, even if it limits progress. To rebuild a life, a person must recognize they are not obligated to remain consistent with a former self. The past self helped them survive earlier circumstances, but survival strategies may not serve future direction. Growth requires permission to become unfamiliar to oneself. Many people continue carrying habits and attitudes that once made sense. Perhaps they learned to remain silent to avoid conflict, or to seek approval to feel accepted. These patterns protected them at one stage of life. However, later they become barriers. The individual senses dissatisfaction, but cannot identify why. They attempt improvement while still operating under old assumptions. The conflict creates confusion. The issue is not lack of effort. It is attachment to behaviors that no longer align with present awareness. Letting go does not mean condemning who they were. It means acknowledging that the previous version completed its purpose. There is a quiet resistance when change challenges memory. A person may think, if I act differently now, what does that say about who I was before? They fear that growth invalidates earlier choices. In reality, growth honors the past by learning from it. Every stage of life contains limited understanding. When knowledge expands, behavior should adapt. Holding on to outdated behavior only prolongs old difficulties. Accepting change means respecting the lessons learned rather than repeating them. A small story illustrates this. A man once prided himself on always agreeing with others to keep peace. For years he believed kindness meant avoiding disagreement. Later he realized he was suppressing his thoughts and becoming resentful. Expressing his opinions felt uncomfortable at first because it contradicted his long-held self-image. Yet once he spoke honestly, relationships improved. He understood he had not betrayed his former self. He had matured beyond a coping strategy that once helped, but now restricted him. Another challenge appears socially. Others may still see a person according to past behavior. Friends or family might expect old reactions and feel surprised by new boundaries. Their expectations can tempt the person to return to familiar patterns. It seems easier to behave as before than to explain change repeatedly, but returning to old roles delays progress. Consistency in new behavior eventually reshapes others' expectations. Patience becomes necessary. Identity must be maintained internally before it is recognized externally. Letting go also involves forgiving oneself. Many people hold guilt for previous mistakes and continue defining themselves by them. They replay events, thinking change would excuse past errors unfairly, yet remaining trapped does not repair the past. Improvement does. Forgiveness is not denial of responsibility. It is acceptance that learning occurred. The person commits to different behavior moving forward. By doing so, they honor both accountability and growth. Emotional habits are often hardest to release. Someone accustomed to constant worry may feel uneasy when calm. Someone used to chaos may feel uncomfortable in stability. The mind equates familiarity with normality. When life becomes healthier, it initially feels strange. The individual may even recreate old patterns unconsciously just to restore familiarity. Recognizing this tendency helps them persist through discomfort. Stability eventually becomes the new normal. Another realization arises: identity is dynamic. It evolves through attention and action. The person is not abandoning themselves by changing, they are updating themselves. Just as a child naturally outgrows earlier understanding, an adult outgrows earlier behavior. The process is continuous. Clinging to an outdated self prevents participation in present life. Releasing it allows engagement with new possibilities. Memories remain, but their role changes. Instead of directing behavior, they inform wisdom. The individual remembers how they once reacted and chooses differently now. The past becomes reference rather than instruction. This shift brings relief. They no longer feel obligated to repeat patterns simply because they once existed. Relationships may transform as well. Some connections were built around old identity. As behavior changes, certain interactions no longer feel natural. This can feel like loss. Yet space created by change allows healthier connections to appear. The person learns that belonging does not require remaining unchanged. True connection respects growth. There is also a practical aspect. New goals require new routines. Old habits occupy time and attention. Releasing them creates capacity for better practices. The person discovers progress is not only about adding, but also about removing. What they stop doing becomes as important as what they begin doing. Confidence strengthens when the individual witnesses their own evolution. They realize they are not fixed. They can adjust direction deliberately. This understanding reduces fear of future mistakes. Even if errors occur, change remains possible. The mind becomes flexible rather than rigid. Patience is essential because the mind sometimes returns to familiar reactions under stress. Instead of discouragement, the person gently redirects themselves. Repetition of new behavior gradually replaces the old pattern. Identity stabilizes through persistence rather than sudden transformation. Over time, the previous self feels distant, not rejected but completed. The individual appreciates who they were because that person carried them to this stage. Gratitude replaces embarrassment. They see continuity instead of conflict between past and present. In the end, letting go of the person you outgrew is an act of respect toward your own development. It allows new understanding to guide new behavior. By releasing outdated roles and habits, the individual steps into a life aligned with current awareness. They do not erase history. They continue it consciously, moving forward with a self that reflects who they have become rather than who they once needed to be. Sometimes a person notices they no longer react the way they once did. Situations that used to provoke anger now bring reflection, and conversations that once caused anxiety now feel manageable. Yet instead of relief, confusion appears. They wonder why familiar reactions disappeared. Part of them wants to return to the old behavior simply because it feels recognizable. The mind associates familiarity with identity. When reactions change, identity feels uncertain. Letting go of the former self begins with accepting this uncertainty. Change often feels less like gaining clarity and more like losing definition. The individual stands between who they were and who they are becoming. This middle space feels uncomfortable, but it is necessary. It is the mind reorganizing its understanding of itself. There are habits a person keeps long after they no longer serve a purpose. They continue apologizing unnecessarily, expecting rejection, or doubting positive outcomes, even when evidence suggests otherwise. These patterns were learned during earlier experiences. They protected emotional stability at a time when confidence was fragile. As life improves, the same patterns create unnecessary limitation. Yet abandoning them feels risky. The person believes the habits keep them safe. They do not notice safety has already increased. Letting go requires recognizing that protection is no longer required in the same way. A memory often holds the old identity in place. Someone remembers being overlooked, criticized, or underestimated. They internalized the experience and formed a self-concept around it. Years later, they still respond as if those conditions remain. Opportunities appear, but they hesitate because their self-image has not updated. The mind remains loyal to outdated circumstances. By acknowledging present reality, they allow their perception to change. The old memory becomes part of history instead of instruction for behavior. There is also grief involved in change. Releasing an earlier self means accepting that a period of life has ended. Even if it was difficult, it was familiar. The person recognizes they cannot return to the comfort of predictable reactions. This recognition carries a quiet sadness. They are not mourning a person but a version of themselves. Accepting this feeling helps them move forward. Without acceptance, they may unconsciously recreate old patterns to avoid the loss. Some individuals keep telling stories about who they used to be. They describe themselves according to earlier traits, even when their actions contradict them. This habit reinforces outdated identity. Language maintains perception. When they begin describing themselves based on current behavior instead of past reputation, their mind adapts. The narrative shifts. Gradually they relate to their present self more than their remembered one. There are relationships built around former identity. Friends may expect the same jokes, the same compliance, or the same emotional reactions. Changing behavior may disrupt these dynamics. The person fears disappointing others by evolving. Yet authenticity requires this risk. Respectful change often leads to healthier interaction. Some connections deepen because honesty increases. Others fade because they depended on roles no longer needed. The process clarifies which relationships support growth. Letting go also requires releasing old ambitions that no longer feel meaningful. Sometimes goals were chosen to gain approval rather than fulfillment. The person pursued them sincerely, but later discovered they did not align with deeper values. Continuing solely to remain consistent creates quiet dissatisfaction. Changing direction feels like admitting error, yet it is actually an admission of awareness. Redefining goals demonstrates maturity rather than failure. Emotional reactions shift gradually. The person pauses before responding where they once reacted immediately. They listen longer, consider alternatives, and forgive more easily. These changes may feel unnatural initially. The mind misses the certainty of automatic reactions. With time, reflection replaces impulse comfortably. Calmness becomes familiar. What once felt like restraint becomes natural response. There is a practical exercise in letting go, acting according to present understanding even when it contradicts past habit. Each time the person behaves differently, they reinforce the new identity. Repetition transforms intention into reality. The mind stops referencing outdated behavior because new evidence accumulates. Identity updates through action rather than reflection alone. Self-respect grows during this transition. The person realizes they are capable of transformation. They no longer believe past traits permanently define them. This realization reduces fear of future change. They trust their ability to adapt. Flexibility replaces rigidity in self-perception. They also become less defensive. When identity is not fixed, criticism feels less threatening. They evaluate feedback thoughtfully rather than protectively. Improvement becomes possible because ego no longer guards outdated patterns. Openness replaces resistance. Over time, the earlier self appears as a stage of development rather than a limitation. The person sees continuity instead of conflict. Every version contributed to current understanding. Instead of rejecting the past, they integrate it. Lessons remain while behaviors evolve. Confidence increases because choices align with present awareness. Decisions feel clearer. The person acts according to values instead of habit. This alignment produces inner stability. Life becomes less reactive and more intentional. Eventually they realize the fear of change was greater than change itself. Once they accepted new behavior consistently, uncertainty faded. Familiarity formed around healthier patterns. The mind adapted quickly once resistance ended. In the end, letting go of the person you outgrew is not abandoning yourself. It is allowing yourself to live in the present rather than the past. By releasing outdated reactions, expectations, and roles, the individual experiences continuity with growth. The self becomes an evolving process, shaped by awareness instead of memory. Chapter 10. Consistency creates a new future. People often imagine the future as something distant and uncertain, shaped by large decisions made occasionally. Yet most futures are not built in rare moments. They are formed quietly through repeated behavior. What a person does every ordinary day becomes the direction their life follows. One decision rarely changes everything, but the same decision repeated many times changes almost anything. Consistency transforms intention into reality because it converts possibility into pattern. When an action appears regularly, the mind adapts, opportunities respond, and results accumulate. The future stops being abstract and begins forming in the present. A person does not wake one day suddenly different. They wake gradually into a life shaped by countless small choices that were performed even when no visible reward appeared. The difficulty is that consistency feels unremarkable. It lacks the emotional intensity people associate with transformation. There is no dramatic turning point, no immediate recognition. Because of this, many abandon steady effort too early. They expect visible improvement within days, and when progress remains subtle, they assume nothing is happening. In truth, change often develops below awareness before appearing externally. Like water shaping stone, repeated actions alter structure slowly. The person cannot see the effect each day, but over months the direction becomes undeniable. Consistency works not through sudden impact, but through continuous influence. A student who studies a little daily eventually understands material. Others struggle to memorize quickly. The difference is not intelligence but repetition. Each small session strengthens familiarity. Concepts connect naturally because exposure was regular. The person who waits for long periods of intense effort experiences frustration, while the one who works steadily experiences clarity. Consistency reduces difficulty because the mind recognizes what it encounters often. What once felt complex becomes simple through repeated contact. There is also psychological change. When a person acts consistently, they stop negotiating with themselves. Decisions become habits. Energy once spent deciding whether to act is saved for the action itself. This reduces mental resistance. The task no longer feels optional, and optional tasks are easily postponed. By removing the daily debate, consistency protects progress. The individual does not rely on momentary enthusiasm, they rely on routine. Consistency gradually shapes environment as well. People begin to trust reliable behavior. Opportunities appear because others recognize dependability. A colleague recommends them, a friend collaborates with them, or a responsibility is offered. These outcomes seem fortunate, yet they often arise from predictable effort observed over time. The world responds to patterns more than intentions. Reliable action communicates seriousness more clearly than ambitious plans. There is a story of a musician who practiced a short period every day for years. He was not exceptionally talented at first, yet his steady routine developed skill naturally. Eventually others described him as gifted. The gift was persistence. His future did not appear suddenly. It emerged from ordinary practice, repeated long enough to become mastery. Each session felt small, but together they created something substantial. Consistency also builds emotional resilience. When effort is regular, setbacks feel temporary rather than catastrophic. Missing one day does not end progress, because many days remain. The person maintains perspective. They understand improvement is a long process. This understanding prevents discouragement. They return quickly to routine instead of abandoning effort entirely. Another change occurs in confidence. Confidence often depends on predictability. When someone knows they will act responsibly tomorrow, anxiety decreases today. They trust themselves. This trust removes hesitation in decision-making. The person plans realistically because they believe in their follow-through. Their future becomes clearer because their behavior is reliable. Consistency reshapes time perception. Days no longer feel disconnected. Each day contributes to a larger direction. The person sees continuity between present effort and future result. They no longer wait passively for life to improve. They participate in shaping it. Progress becomes visible, not in sudden leaps, but in steady movement. Even small routines can transform life direction. Reading a few pages daily develops knowledge over years. Saving small amounts builds financial stability. Exercising briefly improves health gradually. These changes rarely attract attention initially, yet their cumulative effect becomes powerful. Consistency multiplies the impact of modest effort. There is also peace in predictability. The person knows what they will do each day regardless of mood. Emotional fluctuations no longer control productivity. They act during motivation and during ordinary moments alike. Because action is stable, results become stable. Life feels less chaotic. Structure provides calm rather than restriction. Over time, the individual notices something unexpected. The actions that once required discipline now require little effort. Familiarity replaced resistance. What felt difficult became natural simply through repetition. This shift marks true change. The behavior is no longer forced, it is integrated into daily life. Consistency also protects against regret. When effort occurs regularly, the person does not wonder what might have happened if they tried. They are trying continuously. The future becomes less uncertain because it is already forming through present behavior. Anxiety about missed opportunities decreases. Another important effect is patience. The person learns to value progress over immediacy. They accept that meaningful outcomes require time. This patience prevents impulsive decisions and unnecessary changes in direction. Stability replaces restlessness. Eventually results appear externally. Others notice improvement and describe it as sudden success. Only the individual understands it was gradual. Each small effort contributed. The future that seemed distant was built day by day. There was no secret moment, only persistent action. In the end, consistency creates a new future because it aligns daily behavior with long-term intention. The person does not wait for life to change. They participate in its formation steadily. Through repetition, identity strengthens, opportunities emerge, and direction clarifies. What once felt unreachable becomes natural because it was approached patiently every day. The future rarely arrives as a surprise. It often appears exactly as daily behavior prepared it to appear. A person may hope for improvement while repeating the same routine, unaware that repetition itself is a quiet decision about tomorrow. Each day contains small actions that seem ordinary, yet they accumulate into direction. When someone chooses learning repeatedly, knowledge forms. When they choose avoidance repeatedly, limitation forms. The future is not created only by intention, but by repetition. Even when progress is not visible, movement is occurring. Consistency turns daily choices into a path. The person eventually walks into a life that once seemed distant, not because time changed things, but because behavior guided them there. Many people underestimate how small actions compound. They imagine progress must feel dramatic to be real. Because of this, they abandon habits when they seem insignificant. Yet significance often appears only after duration. A few minutes of practice feels trivial today, but months of practice transform skill. A brief reflection feels minor today, but years of reflection reshape understanding. Consistency multiplies effort quietly. The mind notices improvement slowly, and only later does it appear obvious. What looked small was powerful through persistence. There is a psychological benefit as well. Consistency removes dependence on mood. When behavior occurs regardless of emotional state, the person gains stability. They are no longer controlled by fluctuating feelings. Some days they feel enthusiastic, other days neutral, yet action continues. This continuity builds reliability. They begin trusting themselves because their behavior is predictable. Trust in oneself reduces hesitation. Decisions feel clearer because they know effort will follow. Time begins to feel different when consistency exists. Instead of days blending together without meaning, each day contributes to progress. The person senses movement, even if results remain distant. This awareness changes motivation. They no longer require immediate reward. Satisfaction comes from knowing the direction is correct. Direction becomes more important than speed. There is a simple example in language learning. A person studying briefly each day gradually understands conversations they once found confusing. They may not notice improvement daily, but one day comprehension appears natural. The change seems sudden, yet it was prepared through repetition. Consistency built familiarity, and familiarity built confidence. The outcome arrived quietly, shaped by patience. Consistency also shapes opportunity. Reliable behavior attracts responsibility. Others begin to depend on someone who consistently performs. This trust leads to chances that would not appear otherwise. The person may think they were fortunate, but reliability invited the opportunity. The world responds to patterns. Consistent effort signals seriousness more than occasional enthusiasm. Another effect appears in resilience. When effort becomes routine, setbacks lose power. Missing a day no longer ends progress because routine resumes. The person understands the process continues beyond temporary interruption. They recover quickly because the habit remains. This reduces fear of failure. Mistakes become part of learning rather than proof of inability. The mind gradually simplifies decisions. Repeated actions require less thought. Instead of questioning whether to act, the person simply acts. Energy once spent debating is used productively. Life feels calmer because fewer internal arguments occur. Routine provides mental clarity. Consistency also influences identity. The individual begins describing themselves according to behavior they observe regularly. They no longer imagine who they might become. They recognize who they are becoming. This recognition strengthens effort. Actions feel aligned with self-perception, and alignment reduces resistance. Over months, priorities become clearer. The person notices which activities support progress and which distract from it. They naturally reduce distractions because consistency highlights their cost. Attention becomes focused. With focus, improvement accelerates. Another quiet transformation occurs in patience with others. As the individual experiences gradual growth personally, they understand change takes time. They become more understanding toward others' progress. Their expectations become realistic. This empathy improves relationships and communication. Consistency also reduces anxiety about the future. The person stops worrying about distant outcomes because they are actively influencing them daily. Control shifts from speculation to action. Each effort provides reassurance that tomorrow is not random but shaped by present behavior. There is satisfaction in small completions. Finishing planned tasks daily produces steady accomplishment. The mind associates effort with closure. This reduces the stress of unfinished responsibilities. Peace increases because attention is not divided by avoidance. Eventually, visible results appear. Skills improve, health strengthens, knowledge deepens, or stability grows. Others may call it success, but the individual recognizes it as accumulation. Each ordinary day contributed. The extraordinary emerged from repetition. In the end, consistency proves that change does not depend on rare inspiration. It depends on steady participation. By choosing action regularly, the person shapes their direction deliberately. The future becomes less mysterious and more predictable, formed through daily effort that once felt simple but was always decisive. There is a quiet moment at the end of many days when a person senses whether they moved forward or simply passed time. Nothing dramatic happened, yet internally they know the difference. A single completed action can create a feeling of direction, while an entire day of distraction can feel empty. This feeling reveals something important. The future is emotional before it is visible. Consistent effort produces a subtle sense of progress long before results appear. The mind recognizes alignment between intention and behavior. When this alignment repeats daily, the person begins to trust tomorrow more than yesterday. They are no longer waiting for change to arrive unexpectedly. They are participating in its creation through ordinary effort. Consistency teaches the mind to expect improvement. When actions repeat, the brain anticipates continuation. Instead of doubting whether progress will last, the person assumes it will. This expectation changes attitude toward challenges. Difficulties feel temporary because routine will outlast them. Without consistency, every setback appears decisive. With consistency, setbacks appear instructional. The person keeps moving, not because obstacles disappeared, but because movement became normal. Normal behavior shapes perception more strongly than occasional success. There is also a practical shift in attention. When behavior repeats daily, the person becomes more aware of small inefficiencies. They refine their actions gradually. They adjust methods, organize time better, and eliminate unnecessary steps. Improvement accelerates not from working harder, but from working more intelligently. Repetition reveals patterns. Patterns reveal solutions. What once required effort becomes smoother because practice brought understanding. Many imagine future success requires constant motivation, but consistent action often occurs during ordinary emotional states. The person does not feel inspired every day. Instead, they feel steady. This steadiness becomes valuable. It protects progress from emotional fluctuation. Enthusiasm still appears occasionally, yet it is no longer necessary for movement. Stability replaces excitement as the driving force. Another change occurs in patience with outcomes. The person stops demanding immediate results. They accept delay naturally because they experience daily participation in the process. They see themselves as building rather than hoping. The focus shifts from when will it happen to I am making it happen gradually. This perspective reduces anxiety. Time becomes an ally rather than an enemy. Consistency also reduces fear of starting new tasks. Having witnessed progress from repetition, the person trusts the process again. They approach unfamiliar goals calmly. They know improvement will come through continued effort rather than sudden talent. Confidence comes from understanding method, not from believing they are exceptional. There is a social effect as well. People notice reliability. They begin expecting responsibility to be handled properly. This expectation leads to opportunities and respect. The person's reputation grows quietly. They did not seek recognition, yet recognition follows consistent behavior naturally. Dependability becomes visible over time. Small achievements accumulate into identity. Each completed action strengthens the internal narrative of capability. The individual stops asking whether they can succeed and begins planning how to continue. Their thoughts shift from possibility to execution. Identity adapts to behavior repeatedly observed. The mind also becomes calmer. Predictable routine reduces uncertainty. Instead of worrying about what will be done, the person knows. Planning becomes easier because behavior is dependable. Mental energy once spent worrying is now available for creativity and problem solving. Consistency transforms failure. When effort is regular, a single unsuccessful attempt feels like part of the process. The person analyzes, adjusts, and continues. Without routine, failure feels final. With routine, it feels temporary. The difference lies in expectation. The consistent individual expects progress through repetition, not perfection. Another important change is awareness of time's value. By acting daily, the person experiences how much can be achieved gradually. They no longer feel rushed because they trust accumulation. Urgency fades, replaced by steady commitment. They work persistently rather than frantically. Even motivation changes character. Instead of sudden excitement, motivation becomes quiet willingness. The person does not need emotional intensity to begin. Beginning itself generates momentum. Action precedes feeling, and feeling follows action. Over longer periods, life direction becomes clear. The person notices their interest deepening, their skills strengthening, and their choices becoming intentional. They are no longer drifting, they are steering. The future appears less uncertain because it resembles the present effort continued. Consistency also protects against regret. Because the individual participates daily, they do not wonder what might have happened if they tried. They are trying continuously. Their peace comes from effort rather than outcome. They accept results calmly because they know they did not remain passive. In the end, a new future forms quietly, not through sudden change, but through steady involvement. Each ordinary day contributes to an extraordinary transformation. The person realizes the future was never waiting ahead. It was being constructed moment by moment through consistent action. Many people expect change to feel dramatic, yet real transformation often feels repetitive. Each day looks similar to the last, and because of this the person doubts anything meaningful is happening. They forget repetition itself is the mechanism of change. When an action repeats, the brain begins reorganizing around it. What once required effort becomes easier, and what becomes easier begins happening naturally. The future is not shaped in rare emotional peaks. It is shaped in ordinary mornings and evenings, when the person chooses the same constructive behavior again. The sameness they once feared becomes the reason progress continues. Consistency also teaches responsibility toward time. A person starts recognizing that hours are not empty spaces waiting to be filled randomly. They are opportunities to influence direction. When used intentionally each day, time accumulates value. When ignored, it accumulates regret. The realization changes priorities. They stop asking whether they feel like acting and begin asking what action aligns with their intention. This shift makes time purposeful. Even small tasks become meaningful because they connect to a larger aim. There is an internal rhythm that develops through repeated effort. The mind begins expecting activity at certain moments. Instead of resistance, readiness appears. The body and attention adjust to the pattern. Work begins more smoothly because preparation is psychological as well as physical. The person does not force themselves each day. They follow a rhythm they created. This rhythm reduces hesitation and supports persistence. Another benefit appears in clarity. By engaging regularly with a task, confusion decreases. Understanding grows from familiarity. Problems that once felt overwhelming reveal manageable steps. Repetition reveals structure. The person learns not only what to do, but how to do it efficiently. Confidence grows from comprehension, and comprehension grows from consistency. Many abandon goals because they misinterpret slow beginnings. Early stages often show little external improvement, yet internally, important changes occur. Skills develop, attention strengthens, and mistakes decrease gradually. Because these changes are subtle, they are overlooked. Only later does visible progress appear. The person realizes the quiet phase was not empty, it was foundational. Consistency also stabilizes emotions. When effort occurs regularly, the person's mood becomes less reactive to results. A single good day no longer causes excitement, and a single difficult day no longer causes despair. Emotional balance develops. The individual sees progress as long-term rather than momentary. Stability replaces fluctuation. There is also a shift in how challenges are perceived. Instead of obstacles interrupting progress, they become part of the process. The person expects difficulty and prepares calmly. Each solved problem increases competence. Confidence grows because challenges are no longer unexpected. Relationships can improve through reliability. When someone behaves consistently, others feel secure interacting with them. Communication becomes clearer because expectations are predictable. Trust strengthens gradually. Opportunities for cooperation increase. The person's influence expands quietly. Another change is in decision-making speed. Familiar routines reduce uncertainty. The person knows what actions follow their values, so choices become quicker. Less mental energy is spent hesitating. Efficiency improves because clarity exists. Consistency gradually replaces self-doubt with evidence. The person sees their own effort accumulating. They no longer rely on hope to believe in improvement. They rely on observation. This evidence strengthens persistence. The mind trusts action more than intention. Motivation evolves into commitment. Instead of waiting to feel inspired, the person acts because action is part of their routine. The habit of beginning reduces procrastination. Progress continues even when enthusiasm fades. Commitment sustains effort beyond emotion. Time perception changes as well. Weeks and months feel productive rather than repetitive. The person senses continuity between past effort and present ability. Each day contributes to something larger. Life feels connected instead of scattered. Gradually, external results begin appearing. Skills become noticeable. Opportunities arise, and circumstances shift. Others describe these outcomes as sudden, but the individual understands their origin. Each consistent day contributed quietly. Patience becomes natural. Because the person has experienced gradual improvement, they trust the process. They do not rush outcomes, they continue steadily. This patience protects them from impulsive decisions that disrupt progress. In the end, consistency transforms possibility into reality. A person no longer waits for a different future to arrive unexpectedly. Through repeated action, they construct it. The change feels calm rather than dramatic, yet its impact is profound. Their life moves in the direction their daily behavior has been guiding all along. You were never actually late. You were only waiting for certainty before you allowed yourself to change. But life rarely gives certainty first. It gives movement first. A person rebuilds not because everything becomes clear, but because they decide to act while things are still unclear. The past may explain where you came from, but it does not have the authority to decide where you are allowed to go next. What matters is not how many years have passed, but whether you begin today with awareness and intention. Rebuilding yourself does not require dramatic decisions or a perfect plan. It begins quietly, through small choices repeated long enough to reshape how you think, how you react, and how you live. When you change your habits, your self-image follows. And when your self-image changes, your future naturally changes with it. You do not need a new life to start over. You only need a new direction. The moment you stop measuring yourself by your past and start guiding yourself by your actions, your life begins to reorganize around you. It was never too late. You simply had to begin,